And from what I've seen in hip hop, concepts of pimping are not pimping as we're talking about in sex trafficking. Pimping is often soft pedaled in hip hop songs as being a lover of the ladies, of being a charmer, of being a sharp dresser, of being very cool. This is not what pimping is in America. Now, the issue with that is that if you are a traumatized young lady is approached by an actual pimp, and the pimp tells you, I'm a pimp, you may have heard a hip hop song talk about pimping, and that might not set off any warning bells in your head because you've heard it in a song before. It can't be that bad. But the problem is that we have degraded the severity of that word by letting it mean other things. And so that I think is troubling.
Testimony continued today in the most notorious criminal trial in which Dr. John Boyle is accused of killing his wife, Maureen.
The boy confidently told the jury it was his decision to testify against his father.
I heard a scream, I heard a thud. It's about this loud.
We, the jury, find the defendant guilty.
I decided at an early age that our trauma should not be what defines us. It's what we choose to do with it that does. I'm here to share my unique perspective on true crime, mental health, society, and popular culture, and always with a slight sense of humor. I'm Collier Landry, and welcome to my show. So my guest today is Brian Joseph. He is the author of Vegas Concierge, Sex Trafficking, Hip Hop, and Corruption in America, which deals directly with all of those issues and uses the story of a years-long investigation as a narrative vehicle to explore how American society fails sex trafficking victims and survivors. He is an investigative journalist, and he has joined the program today. Brian, thank you so much for being here.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
You've been working on this project since, what, 2017?
Depending on how you look at it, yes. 2017 is one way to look at it, yes.
First of all, I've talked about this on the program. I have a friend of mine who works for DHSI. And we were discussing what exactly sex trafficking is, but a lot of people seem very confused. I know what drug trafficking is, but I didn't quite understand what sex trafficking is. Why don't you explain to me in your words what that is?
Well, sex trafficking is simply the use of force, fraud, or coercion to get someone, typically a woman, to engage in sexual activities in which commerce is somehow involved.
How does that differ from prostitution in a way? If you're saying commerce is involved, is it because the women are being exploited by the person that's taking the money, like let's say a pimp situation or something like that? Or
I would say that in most situations, prostitution is synonymous with sex trafficking. One of the issues that we address in Vegas Concierge is the mistaken belief that there is some sort of difference between the pimp prostitute subculture and sex trafficking. In my experience and in my reporting, those things more often than not are synonymous.
How'd you get into all this?
An editor suggested I might be interested in writing about sex trafficking. I had previously done a very large project about privatized foster care and children that were killed and injured in privatized foster care. And the notion of investigating sex trafficking appealed to me because I thought sex trafficking victims were similar to foster care children in the sense that they're both marginalized communities that policymakers don't seem to care very much about.
I was raised in foster care for part of my life. I always tell people it is a horrific situation that a lot of people don't quite understand. Even in its best case scenario, it's awful. Children are often, for me, the threat was, if you don't do what we say, we're going to throw you in an orphanage with the rest of the kids type situation. I could see the parallels of this for sure, but we won't get into that right at the second. So, okay. So you had done this story, very large investigation on the foster care system. You get involved in sex trafficking. So tell me how all this unfolds for you. And you're from Vegas, correct? Well, you're from Missouri, but
I'm from Nebraska.
Live in Vegas? Nebraska. Sorry. Omaha, Nebraska. Sorry. You hail from the Husker territory. Tell me how this whole thing unfolded.
I was offered a job to work for a news organization in Las Vegas, and I began investigating sex trafficking when I started there.
Sure. And what did those stories look like?
Well, it was a very slow process. I mean, this is not unlike with the issue of foster care. What I found when I was doing that research is that there was always something people wanted to talk about. Maybe it was not, maybe that was not a topic that they, were. It was a sensitive topic. Maybe it was something that they weren't jumping over backwards, wanting to talk about, but there was something that was on their mind. Maybe it was an unresponsive agency. Maybe it was the fact that their children had been taken away. There was something on their mind that they had a desire to talk about. With sex trafficking, I found that almost in all cases, nobody wanted to talk about it at all. And so a huge portion of my reporting, particularly in the early stages, involved just building trust with people, letting them know that I really wanted to understand this issue. I wanted to understand their story. I wanted to understand the global issues surrounding sex trafficking. And so a lot of it really was about, showing that I was an honest person, that I wanted to understand their stories in a genuine way. And then it was also involved just, doing as much research as I could while I was waiting for people to feel comfortable to talk to me. So that meant, reading a lot of court cases, reading a lot of studies, reading a lot of news stories, that sort of thing.
When you dove into those court cases, I have a friend that works as a liaison. You'll understand this with the foster care system. He's a liaison between foster parents and guardian ad litems, or between the guardian ad litems and the court system. And he often in those cases, right, there's a lot of minors, so a lot of these names and stuff are redacted, but everything that goes through family court becomes public record. Did you find that in that same situation? I mean, obviously because you investigated foster care, but similar situations when having access to these court documents, like once they're published, you're able to just have a treasure trove of stories at your fingertips?
Yes and no. I mean, I think the best stories, or I should say the most detailed stories, came out whenever a case would go to trial. Until that happened, there was you had a limited window into the particular incident itself. When the case would go to trial, there would be quite a lot of information available. But oftentimes sex traffickers, pimps, these are canny people. So a lot of them would realize when their time was up and they cop a plea before it would go to trial. So a lot of cases, you would get some insights, but not as many as you would if the pimp was stubborn enough to go to trial.
So tell me about a few of these cases that really stuck out in your mind, if you wouldn't mind sharing.
I mean, I have numerous ones through the course of my reporting over the years. I mean, I can tell you, just sort of generally speaking, that almost always a victim of sex trafficking, long before they ever became involved in what we might term the sex industry, they've had something very traumatic happen in their lives. And maybe they were sexually molested. Maybe they saw a relative or experienced the murder of a relative or a lover. Maybe didn't see it directly, but it happened in their lives. Maybe they were neglected as a child. Something very traumatic and awful happened to them. So something that any human would have compassion for, and that initial victimization made them then vulnerable to the manipulations of a sex trafficker, of a pimp. And those pimps would then prey on the psychological pain of these victims that have already been victimized once before, and essentially brainwash them into believing that the only thing that they were good for is selling their bodies for money. And then once that happened, the pimp would then take control of essentially their entire lives, forcing them to engage in sex for hire, multiple times a day, with them having no choice to say yes or no to it, and then controlling every little bit of their lives, where they live, where they go, what they do, sometimes what they eat. I mean, it's a total domination of will by these traffickers. I mean, there's it's sometimes considered a cliche to think about sex trafficking as modern day slavery, but I absolutely believe that to be the case. Sex trafficking is modern day slavery, and it is happening in America every day.
The overarching theme always seems to be this trauma and childhood trauma, and why these people latch onto. I almost wonder, look, I mean, I'm no stranger to childhood trauma. I wonder, and part of your book and in your title, you talk about the relationship to the hip hop industry in particular, in this scenario. And obviously there is it's it's interesting because once one case comes out or one person speaks up in the society that we currently live in, it seems like the dominoes start to fall and everyone comes out of the woodwork. But obviously with the arrest last week of Sean P. Diddy Combs and his arraignment and the subsequent arraignment, and now he's locked up until trial. What do you know as an insider who obviously investigated this, of the entanglements, the very complex web that has been woven between hip hop culture and sex trafficking?
Well, I want to be very clear from the get-go that I do not believe that hip hop culture, there's anything intrinsic to hip hop culture with sex trafficking. I want to make that very clear from the get-go. The reason why hip hop is included in our book is because the main sex trafficker in our book leveraged the money that he made as a sex trafficker to essentially make himself into a hip hop star. That is the primary connection between hip hop and sex trafficking in the book that I wrote. Now, to be clear, that also allowed us to then explore the fact that pimping does appear in a number of lyrics of hip hop songs. And from what I've seen in hip hop, concepts of pimping are not pimping as we're talking about in sex trafficking. Pimping is often soft pedaled in hip hop songs as being a lover of the ladies, of being a charmer, of being a sharp dresser, of being very cool. This is not what pimping is in America. Now, the issue with that is that if you are a traumatized young lady is approached by an actual pimp, and the pimp tells you, I'm a pimp, you may have heard a hip hop song talk about pimping, and that might not set off any warning bells in your head because you've heard it in a song before. It can't be that bad. I mean, there was the exhibit show, Pimp My Ride. Pimping can't be that bad. But the problem is that if you understand what a pimp truly is, they're as evil and heartless and horrible as a Nazi. We have degraded the severity of that word by letting it mean other things, and so that I think is troubling. But I want to be very clear that I have found nothing intrinsic to hip hop connecting hip hop to the exploitation of vulnerable women, and indeed, there's wonderful hip hop that has nothing to do with pimping at all. I mean, you can look at Lauryn Hill, you can look at Missy Elliott.
I grew up listening to hip hop. I grew up listening to a lot of Sean Diddy Combs artists, Notorious B.I.G. being the most important in my mind, and probably one of the most prolific in hip hop history. So to me, I have a real affinity for, I started listening to Public Enemy when I was in foster care. So I know a lot about it. And it's really spoke to me as a cultural component that at the time was a very small component of our society was going to blow up, because there's so many common threads with everyday life, that common themes of, social injustice, injustice towards minorities, and justice towards people of poverty, the overall exploitation of society in general, right? How does this dovetail with the current issue with Diddy?
Well, I think what it dovetails is this, simply that men in power frequently use that power to exploit vulnerable people. And, Diddy is just another example of that.
In your book, who is it that you're discussing that is using the people that they exploit? Was he a pimp and then he became a hip hop star? Is that
the book? Looks at the years-long investigation of hip hop music producer Maul, who was convicted of a prostitution-related charge pled to a prostitution-related charge in 2019. His involvement in sex trafficking is well documented in court files and in news stories. This book looks at it very deeply into how that case was investigated, and specifically follows along the parallel paths of a victim, as well as a survivor of sex trafficking, and an honest vice cop who was involved in the investigation of Maul.
Because I've heard this name before. He was around in hip hop for a long time, correct?
There is
Notorious B.I.G. mentions Marley Marl, right? Is that a different?
He mentions Marley Marl, somebody
Marley
different.
Marl.
Something, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. This is Molly Maul. He is a hip hop music producer. He came on the scene mid-aughts, blew up in 2011 when he was name dropped in Drake's song "The Motto." He was involved in phone cloning in Northern California as a young man. Eventually moved to Vegas and got involved in owning an escort business and used that to become quite wealthy, and then proceeded to use that wealth to purchase a lot of cars, a big mansion, and then translated that into into becoming a hip hop music producer, and eventually found himself as a subject of the television show Love and Hip Hop Hollywood.
Oh, really? So he had his own show?
He was on Love and Hip Hop Hollywood, yes.
Wow, as one of the contestants. I've never seen the show, so explain to me how that works.
So it was a reality TV show about the relationships of people in hip hop, and he was on that.
Got it. So he was a contestant. He was involved in relationships.
It was it was kind of like a Real Housewives of type show. It was just about their lives.
Got it. And so he was one of the people that they covered, but they covered him in a way that they sort of whitewashed him as an entrepreneur.
They talked about him as a hip hop music producer. They didn't. I can't say that I've seen every episode that
Sure.
he was a part of, but my understanding is that his involvement in trafficking was not specifically addressed.
Yeah. So that rose him to prominence, and you say that he was name dropped in a Drake song in 2011, which blew him up. So, there's a lot of situations right now with Diddy being tied to a lot of people. And obviously when you are at that echelon of the music industry, you are going to be connected with a lot of people.
Absolutely.
The spires go, out. What is the fine sort of line between the hip hop artist is promoting another hip hop artist, or the hip hop artist then crosses the Rubicon into promoting someone who is trafficking women?
Well, I mean, I think the fact of the matter is that as in many industries, people don't often. My understanding is that they don't know who they're dealing with. I would hope that was the situation with the people that had worked with Molly Maul, that they didn't know his involvement in trafficking. I suspect that would be hard to not know, given how I understand his life was led. But the bottom line is that I think that whenever we are engaged in business with people and promoting people, we need to better understand who they are truly, where their proceeds come from, and the kind of lifestyles that they lead.
Yeah, I mean, I would concur with that 100%. I think there were a lot of people, or you just look at even something completely different, but Sam Bankman-Fried, who's doing whatever now, 170 years or something in federal prison for defrauding investors with his FTX cryptocurrency and exchange, and the dominoes that have fallen out. His girlfriend or wife or whatever she was to him is now going away, and you had tons of celebrities, Tom Brady included, out there endorsing the product and getting paid millions and millions of dollars for it. Talk to me about, as a journalist, would you say this is a systemic problem in a lot of ways, with this celebrity or celebrification of people that endorses their bad behavior in our society, whether it be via social media, whether it be television and film, hip music? I
think, sadly in American society today, we let a lot of things go, things that, should really stop us in our tracks and make us say, we can't be a part of this. As it specifically relates to trafficking and the pimp prostitute subculture, it is my sense that there's just a lot of people in America today who do not view these women as victims and survivors, but rather as just throwaway people that have for lack of a better term, have low morals or have asked for this. That is just absolutely incorrect. But because of that persistent perception in American society, American pop culture lets these things go when people are involved in stuff like this. And it doesn't become a line in the sand where we say this person can't be supported anymore. It gets overlooked. And I think that's morally wrong.
Yeah, it takes me back to did you ever watch Succession on HBO?
A little bit.
It was one of my favorite shows. So there's this cruise scandal, and there are these people that got killed on their cruise ships, and they designate these people who have either been thrown overboard, who were killed. People, they call them NRPI, no real person involved. So when they describe these incidents reports, it's NRPI. It seems like, this is a very sad part of our culture that people do not understand how people are affected and how they're roped in, how they're coerced, and how they're then controlled in these scenarios that they get themselves involved in, and how difficult it is to escape. There's a lot of guilt and shame that surrounds that.
Absolutely. Once people enter the pimp prostitute subculture, there is so many negative emotions that become connected to victims and survivors that makes it very difficult for them to seek help or to even admit what they've gotten themselves involved in. It can be very difficult for them to talk to their own family members and friends about what they're experiencing and the help that they need. And that's because of the societal shame that we surround this issue. Again, we don't understand that these people are hurting. Instead, we diminish them by dismissing them as morally bankrupt or just bad people, and that's just not the case. And that is the hope with the book, is that we can begin to change that narrative, and people can understand the nuances of what's involved in these people's lives and in this issue in general.
Yeah, I think that we just it's many serial killers, for example, go after vulnerable people. I remember I interviewed a woman who she was not a victim, she escaped, but of the Milwaukee Strangler. She was a sex worker, went to the police and said X, Y, and Z, and they just dismissed her. And she was talking about other women who had died, and they dismissed her. And she very fortunately got clean and sober, got out of that lifestyle, is doing great now. But obviously these events scar her for life. But she also, in a lot of ways, was very frustrated because she didn't feel like her voice was heard at all. And she's a person saying this person did this, but you've chosen this life, which, as you point out very accurately, a lot of this comes from massive childhood trauma and mistreatment and abuse and neglect. And they're looking for anywhere to grab onto to be, look, I mean, I've gone through massive childhood trauma, and I will engage in relationships, just normal, male, female, boyfriend, girlfriend relationships that are probably toxic to me, but because I have this underpinning, work in progress that I have to deal with of, hey, my father murdered my mother. I went to foster care. I was abandoned by my family. I have this need, this void that sometimes needs to be filled. And then you get involved in your relationships. This is no different than these people. I just might be sitting here having a career, but I still go through those wave of emotions. Some people are more susceptible to, I don't know if you would say bad life choices, but unconventional lifestyle choices that lead them down these paths. Was there one victim or survivor that you spoke to that really, their story really shook you?
I mean, that's a very hard question to respond to. I mean, every victim and survivor story that I've heard is like a gut punch. I mean, these are not easy things to hear, and are not. I mean, like I said, anyone with any ounce of humanity would just feel such compassion for what these women and girls have gone through. I will say that the main subject of the book, a survivor, was very candid and courageous in telling her story in a very public way in Vegas Concierge, and her story is very disturbing with the things that she had to endure. And my hope is that by her having the courage to speak out and tell people what she experienced, that the larger American public can begin to understand what girls and women like her have gone through.
Do you think, what a lot of the stuff with Diddy that people have brought up is the massive machine that was behind him? Obviously, that would be the music business, but how, when you have this seemingly infinite amount of power and money and resources at your disposal, how this promulgates this type of behavior is the same thing in Vegas. Big money town, lots of money coming through. Talk to me about how that industry not only probably turns a blind eye to it. I mean, we all heard stories. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, but how that machine did that machine play a massive part in what happened in this particular case in this book?
There is very little incentive for anybody in Vegas to, I shouldn't say anybody, for many people in Vegas to do anything about prostitution. Understand that in Nevada, prostitution is legal in certain rural counties, not in Clark County where Las Vegas is, but in other rural counties. As a result, for tourists that come to Nevada, they can sometimes be confused about what is legal and not legal in Vegas. Casinos have very little incentive to clarify that to a tourist. They want their tourists to stay at the casino as long as possible. As a result, I think it's fair to say that for many people in the casino business, as long as prostitution is not causing a ruckus, they turn a blind eye to it, and that plays a major role in the continuation of exploitation that happens in this city.
You ended up interviewing a Metro detective?
Sergeant, yes. He is the other main subject of the book, yes.
And what was his role in all of this?
He oversaw a large portion of the early stages of the investigation into Maul as well as several other pimps.
Was he the one leading the charge of saying, I'm not going to allow this to happen? Because it seems like he is fighting against the system as well, and probably putting, I would imagine, in a lot of ways, putting his own livelihood, his family's welfare in jeopardy, because you're going against such a juggernaut.
I would say that during his time on the police department, he had allies in his efforts to change the culture and change the way things were approached. But as we just discussed, I mean, this is a large societal issue, and he was pushing it back against a very large force. I don't know that he would call himself the single voice, but he was a voice and a critical voice, along with others, to try and change the way that this issue was approached. And
was he successful in prosecuting or in getting justice for Maul?
That case, as the book shows, spun out of control for a number of reasons, but he was able to help other women seek justice
against Maul.
The Maul case became quite a scandal, I think it's fair to say, and ended up becoming something that the FBI got involved in, dragged on for quite some time, had a lot of twists and turns, and that colors and that texture is all part of the book, and explaining. Again, there's a part in the book where this sergeant looks back on the Maul case and begins to realize that there were so many people at so many critical junctures that could have done something had they been concerned about victims, but instead were concerned about something else. And as a result, the case was allowed to continue to spin and spin and spin more and more out of control.
And what was this something else?
Oh, there's a number of things. The way there was a police detective that handled himself in a way that was questionable, that opened up
internal affairs, or
it allowed people to question his intentions and what he was doing, which then gave certain sex traffickers some leverage in court. At the same time, there was some news coverage that amplified some allegations that were then seized on by other pimps to help themselves as well. There's other internal workings of the police department and how confidential information was obtained that further muddied the waters. All of that became a part of this issue.
You went into this in the best of intentions to not only expose this type of behavior, and as you said at the beginning of the program, you originally started off dealing with the foster care system. So you have this sort of the fundamental marrow of your being speaks to the stories of the survivors and the victims. Tell me, what your hope is with, your book, which comes out on October 1st, what you hope to achieve for them.
My hope is that the book will allow us to have a more nuanced discussion about this issue and about the people involved in it. My sense is that sex trafficking victims and survivors are perceived in American pop culture as very two-dimensional characters. bit players in a Liam Neeson movie. That's not who they are. These are three-dimensional people that have experienced some severe, horrific pain in their lives and deserve a tremendous amount of compassion. Our society also needs to catch up with the issues that they face and needs to be more prepared to engage with them and to help them. Sadly, as you described, with the serial killer woman, there are just people in our society are not prepared to interact with victims and survivors of sex trafficking, and as a result, often discount what they have to say, and that is simply wrong. And we need to become more prepared at all levels of our society, not only the Justice Department, but in hospitals and schools. Anywhere that you interact with people, we need to be prepared to address this issue and to help people in need.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we see that a lot in, for lack of a better term, rape culture. We see so much shame and excoriations of victims. Well, you shouldn't have worn. I mean, my favorite, and I'm saying this very sardonically and very sarcastically, is, well, you shouldn't have worn that. You shouldn't have been there at that time. You shouldn't have been alone in the bar. It's instead of, he shouldn't have done that. He should know that no means no. Nobody should put their hands on you when you say, don't do that. Just because you dress a certain way doesn't mean that they have carte blanche to treat you a certain way. I want to say it's vile, because it is vile on how some of these survivors are shamed in ways that it's heartbreaking, because you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't in a lot of ways. Would you agree? And
it's grotesque. I mean, I don't know what to say beyond that. It's grotesque, and it's a misinterpretation of the situation. It's a misreading of what's going on, and we as a society need to have a reckoning about that.
But what does that reckoning look like for you in your sort of utopian view of how things would go?
I mean, people need to open their eyes and understand what the realities are that these victims and survivors face, and that again is what we're hoping to do with the book, is let people really understand in an authentic but sensitive way what the texture of their lives are like and what their stories are like.
Yeah, and I mean, and again, I was raised in Ohio. I come from a domestic violence background, but domestic violence is something, again, one of those things. There's a lot of shame and castigation that comes down on these people involved in these relationships, and it's hardly ever against the perpetrator.
Well, there's also a lot of misunderstanding too, right? I mean, the battered spouse sometimes is not well understood by people in society. They might not understand why the battered spouse continues to go back to the batterer. But we as a society need to better understand the dynamics at play, the psychology at play, have compassion for what's involved, and be and have the tools and policies ready to step in to help.
What do you think the answer is, man? Like, how do you think that is it through the elections process? Is it through grassroots organization? Like, what do you?
I mean, I'm not a politician. I'm not a policymaker. I don't claim to have all of the answers, but I do know that it starts with compassion, and it starts with humanity, and it starts with seeing other people as similar to yourself, and not having so much of a barrier or divide between us. And I think that's where it has to start. It has to start with each of us and having a true heart for other people.
All starts with compassion, and understanding that we're all connected, and we're all capable of making the same poor choices or putting ourselves in situations because we need love, man. We're all humans. We're all imperfect. And I think we often forget that in this society. And it's very important that we all recognize our own imperfections and have compassion for each other because of that, and not judge each other. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, do you think that when cases like this come down, as Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, Harvey Weinstein, now we've got Diddy, do you believe that it really does heighten public awareness and also empathy and understanding of what these scenarios that these survivors go through?
It certainly heightens awareness, and that is the first part. I do fear that news coverage of these cases is not nuanced enough and is not compassionate enough that people get a full picture of what the victims and survivors go through. That's something that we spent a great deal of time with Vegas Concierge. Was thinking through how can we, in a very vivid way and in a very real way, help the general public understand the motivations of victims and survivors, how they end up in these situations, and really see their stories for see them for the compassion that people need to have for those stories. I'm very afraid in the news coverage around all the big cases that you just mentioned, that the victims sort of get tossed to the side and get sort of this, again, two-dimensional treatment. They look like, characters from The Equalizer or Taken. They don't become fully developed individuals. And that's something that we spent a great deal of time with Vegas Concierge, was really particularly the very courageous survivor that was willing to speak, really helping readers see in a very nuanced way, the story of her life.
There's such opportunity in these scenarios for people to really galvanize and say we're done with this shit, and there are, in all fairness, there are many segments of the population that know exactly what this is, and I think it uniquely dovetails into survivors of domestic violence and domestic abuse. They know what coercive control is. They know what manipulation is. They know what it's like. One of the things that, as I said, a friend of mine works for DHSI. And he was explaining how a lot of times these people will be, let's say, brought in from overseas, or, they're here on a green card, or whatever, and they come into the home of the individual for a job or what have you, and their papers are seized, their finances are seized, their credit cards, they're put in this, they don't have access to this, and without their IDs or without their papers, they can't do anything. They can't get money. They are solely dependent on the person. And it's interesting when you frame it in that sort of scenario, because what does a marriage look like when you're in a marriage with someone who is a controlling, coercive, controlling, manipulative, narcissistic, abusive person who controls the bank account, who controls everything, who has your passport in the safe? It's the same thing. You're held hostage in a lot of ways. And maybe you have children with them. And you're even more so because you're trying to take care of the children. But if he doesn't put that $500 in your bank account for groceries, how are you going to get groceries? Or even in divorce scenarios too, where partners are dependent upon alimony or child support, again, weaponized. Explain to me how that's any different in a lot of ways.
It's not. It's exactly the same. But the issue circles back to what we were talking about earlier about the societal shame. So many of these victims and survivors, not only of sex trafficking, but of domestic violence and so many other things, don't feel comfortable speaking out about this. And because they don't feel comfortable speaking out about this, because of the societal shame, society doesn't understand what they're going through. And so that's why people like the main character, the main subject, I should say, of Vegas Concierge is so remarkable. Her courage to speak up and tell her story in a very vivid, candid way, I think will go a long way towards helping people understand the plight of sex trafficking victims and survivors.
Yeah. And hopefully it does that to let people know that they're going to be okay in these situations. I think having a beacon of hope, a lighthouse out there that they can go, oh, okay, that's where we're at. Absolutely.
People, we need, our society needs more role models of that hope. And certainly the main subject of Vegas Concierge is a role model of that hope.
Brian, where can my audience, the book comes out on October the 1st. Where can they find the book? Tell us a little bit about that. where they can find you on social media?
So the book is available, to use the cliche, wherever books are sold. It's available at your local independent bookseller. It'll be available. It's available right now for pre-order on Amazon and Barnes & Noble's website. It's available at a number of booksellers across the country and internationally. You can read more about the book on the book's standalone website, vegasconciergebook.com, which includes descriptions of the two main subjects of the book, as well as a little bit more about the general thrust of the story itself, as well as a lot of resources for victims and survivors and people that want to help victims and survivors.
And where can they find you on? Are you on social media, your website, besides the book?
I'm really focused at the moment on promoting the book and not myself. It's very important to me that I make that distinction. It would be very easy to use this book as a way to promote myself, and I don't believe that's appropriate. The victims and survivors have already been exploited. I believe that my focus should be on talking about this issue and not myself. Yeah, I do have a Twitter handle, but I think it's much more important that people focus on this issue and not me.
I respect that. I respect that. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining the program, Brian Joseph. He is the author of Vegas Concierge, Sex Trafficking, Hip Hop, and Corruption in America. Brian, thank you so much for joining the program. I greatly appreciate it. We will have a link to the book's standalone website in the show notes of today's episode, along with additional resources where if you are experiencing any of this type of abuse, neglect, we will have links to those resources in the show notes of today's episode. Brian Joseph, thank you so much for joining the program.
Thanks for having me.
Mover Nation, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much to all my channel members and Patreon supporters. And for more exclusive content, behind the scenes videos, monthly VIP meet and greets and watch parties, please consider supporting me on Patreon or by becoming a YouTube channel member. If you like this video, check out this one right here or this one right here. And don't forget to like and subscribe because it helps with the algorithm. On that note, I'm Collier Landry. I'll see you on the next one. Good girl, Marisol. Good girl.